let's move on to our feature reviews. We're going to start with Underwater Cities. And Jeff, you have way more experience in the board game podcasting, clearly, because I can't even speak. You have more experience in the board game podcasting world. So why don't you kick us off and tell us all about Underwater Cities?
Okay, Underwater Cities. Again, this is my favorite game. So I'm just going to be talking about how much I love it. So this is came out in 2018. Okay, Vladimir Suchy has continually designed games that I just like fall in love with. Like I start to read the rules, I'm like, this guy just gets me. You know, you read it, you get the feel. It's like, yeah, he just understands what I want in games. So BGG has it. Matt wonderfully made this little thing for me. It's 43rd. On the BGG rankings. So it's in the top 100, top 50. I think it's 42 rankings, a little low, but it should be number 1. But an 8.1 over an 8 on BGG is like untouchable, right? Those games are incredible. Whether you like them or not is a different story, because some of the games are rated highly to be like, this isn't my type of game, right? People play brass and they're like, you got to understand the game is great, but it's not for you. This game checks a lot of boxes for me. I think it's wonderful. So the theme of this thing, and a lot of themes in a lot of board games are like the people, like us as human beings have ruined the planet. This one's a little different. This one is, I think we're just overpopulating. I think we're banging too much and there's just too much. We're running out of room on the surface. And now we're going to start building cities underwater, which is why it's called Underwater Cities.
Genius title.
They just figured it out, it starts there. A genius title, genius theme. And what you're doing is you're really just working to build these cities underwater and create like a sustaining little community on your own player board. Underwater, of course. And you're using the mechanisms in the game are mostly worker placement and like hand management, because you have to manage these cards in your hand. And it smushes those two things together seamlessly and almost perfectly, in my opinion. If anybody's out there has not played Underwater Cities but have played something like Lost Ruins of Arnak, it's similar, but I think Underwater Cities does it a little better. So you begin sort of with a player board, and if you just buy the base box, you get like this. It's like a piece of paper. It's a really
thin
poorly produced. Yeah, it's almost like Bible paper. It just is nothing. So that's where I'd say go get the expansion, get the nicer boards. Anyway, you get a little player board where you're essentially building your town, your city, okay? With these little domes that are the cities and these tunnels. And you also have a hand of cards, okay? And on your turn, what you do is you place a worker onto any available spot and you play a card. And here's where the game gets really just juicy, is if the card that you play matches the color of the spot that you put your worker on, you get to take both of those actions. You take the card first, you can take that board action first, whichever you want. And that just creates these really incredible like combos through the game where you're planning, you're like, okay, I need to build this, I need to build a tunnel. You're like, I don't have a green card. What can I do to get around that? Or maybe the green card lets you build a tunnel and now you can do something extra on the green space action. It all just comes together for this really great mix of like strategy and tactical decisions. Because you can have this giant plan in your head and then you have a hand of red cards and you're like, I don't want to take all these red actions. What can I do? Anyway, so and all those actions basically get you the stuff that you need to build your cities, to build the tunnels, to build these like factories, to upgrade all of that stuff, to really get your engine going. Because every 3 or 4 rounds are sort of like a pause and a production round where your player board produces everything that is on it. Cities produce like food and money and steel and all this kind of stuff. And you collect a bunch of crap to sort of get you through the next few rounds.
Very satisfying moment, yeah.
It's great where you're just like, ooh, this gets me this and this and this and this and this and this. And you just count it, and you get all this stuff. And then you're like, I have so many.
A pile of resources by the end.
You feel so awesome. You have all this stuff. And then for some reason, like 3 rounds later, you're like, I have nothing. Where did it all go?
It goes away so fast. Yeah.
It goes away. You just, in that first round after production, you're like, I can do whatever I want. And then like 4 turns later, you're like, I have nothing left. What do I do? And then you basically go like, so you get 3 turns every round, and you play 10 rounds. It's 9 rounds with the expansion if you throw that in. And then there's a little pointality mix for the things that you've accomplished on your boards. There's personal, there's public objectives. There's a bunch of different ways to score points. There's an expansion. The expansion is called, what's the expansion called? New Discoveries is what it's called.
New Discoveries, yeah.
New Discoveries adds a must-needed dual layer player board. If you've ever listened to the Gamecasters, you know that dual layer player board. If you can get one of those, you should because and for this game, you have these like actually plastic little domes, and you have these tunnels that sit perfectly into the dual layer player board, and it's 2-sided, which really changes the map and resources that you have to. Some of them you have to pay to produce on your board. Some of them you get. The expansion also adds it's called the New Discoveries board. That as you build on your own player board, you can reach these little, I don't know, the little icons basically that allow you to get bonuses on this other separate board.
Yeah, it's like a milestone of sorts. Yeah.
And again, just a bunch more cards. So I think the game just hits for me on really all cylinders. The management of the workers and the cards in my hand and what spaces I need to use is just that perfect like brain burn every single time. And I've played it, a dozen times, and I still don't feel like I'm going into it knowing what I'm going to do. Like in my head, I'm like, maybe I want to build more, I want to build more desalination plants or something, right? I want to build more yellow plants. And then I go in and my first hands of cards have nothing to do with that. I'm like, all right, I got to do something else.
And we pivot.
And and that tactical decision is so great. And this game does something that Terraforming Mars, I think, missed on, because these two games get compared a lot with each other in terms of the card play and the resources and things like that. Is that this Underwater Cities has broken up the cards into 3 different eras, which sort of, not entirely, but sort of, I don't want to say help you along the way, but they are aimed at that sort of era. Instead of a giant deck of cards like an Arc Nova or like Terraforming Mars, just splitting them up into different things, makes you feel like you have a choice and there's something more there.
Yeah, I think primarily, like, there's nothing worse than getting a card that is clearly a late game card early in the game. That's just kind of not useful at all in building your engine or setting yourself up for success early, or getting an early game card as like your last couple of card draws. You're like hunting for something to like finish an objective or whatever, and you end up with like something that's like, every time you build a tunnel, get X, Y, and Z. And it's like, well, I don't have any tunnels left to build. Like, I'm at the end game here. I'm in the 3rd era, right? So I think it's genius that they set up the 3 eras so that in era 1, you're getting a lot more, engine building, early resource stuff that you need. In the mid game, you're getting a good mix of both, and in the late game, you're getting mostly just like bigger, more, I guess more opportunities to combo and finish things off, and late game or end game scoring cards in that last era. So it just makes sense, especially when you get a game with this many cards. It can be frustrating for sure. And I know that happened to me in my one and only play of Terraforming Mars. This had already been in my collection and was one of my favorite games. And there's a good amount of crossover between what you're doing in Terraforming Mars and what you're doing in Underwater Cities. There, you're doing a little bit more engine building. Here, it's more about the worker placement. Those are the 2 big differences. But other than that, you're in both games, you're setting up a player board. In Terraforming Mars, it's shared, but you're still building a place that it's not habitable to a place that is habitable, and then adding all the things that you need to do to make those things work. So there's lots of crossover there, but definitely if you're more into the worker placement, which adds a ton of player interaction to the game, there's 3 or 4 spots that are just critical that you have to use in this game. And to set yourself up to be the first player, because there's like a Federation track on the board, and this Federation track is a spot that you can move up. And then at the end of the round, whoever's at the top of that track goes first. So the player order changes every single round depending on where you land on that track for that previous round. So the player interaction that this Federation track puts into the game, and the natural player interaction that just comes with worker placement,
Yeah.
for me, takes this game to a level where I'm very invested in what my opponents are doing, how many resources of a certain type they might have. Can they take that action yet? No, not yet. Okay, I have more time to like set things up before I go and take that specific action.
Right. Yeah, you're right about that
kind of
Federation track. And for some reason, they did it so well because a Federation track feels like you don't want that action. Nobody wants the Federation track,
That's
right? But you go, all right, I need to do this because next round I need to get that special scoring card. Like I need to be first because, and what's great is the interaction between two players. So like when I play with my wife all the time, that you can wait. The two of us wait until we could be in round 7 or 8 before we touch a special card. Thinking about what we have. And again, looking at each other's board to go, all right, this one benefits me the most. When you're playing at 4 players, I've had people reach for those special cards like in round 5, 4, you know, where you're like, all right, I'm first.
Second era. Basically.
Yeah, I'm just going to get it. Like I'm first. This might be the only time I'm going to be first for the rest of the game. I'm going to take this card right now and build towards it. Instead of sometimes in a 2-player game, you can build and then go, all right, this is the best card for me. Mm-hmm. And it just works because like, here's this garbage action that you don't really want, but it's going to help you later. I promise.
For sure.
If used well. Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of 2 players, I'm not if I had to pick a number 1 game that scales from 2 to 4 players the best, this might be the game that I choose. It's 2-sided, so if you're playing 2 players,
the board,
you're flipping the board over and you're playing on the 2-player side, which has less spaces and it's set up in such a way that just makes more sense in terms of limitations and what you're trying to do with 2 players. You flip it over to the 3 and 4-player side, and then if you're playing 4 players, there's another little mechanism that they add. I haven't played 4 players that often. I'm not sure what it's called, but
I don't know. It's like a repeat action. Like basically, you pay to take someone else's a spot.
Oh, you can go somewhere where somebody already is. So one person can do that.
One, yep.
You pay, you take the token, and then you can do that one time. So it just kind of like makes one space be able to be duplicated in the way that worker placement doesn't usually allow. Mm-hmm. So just with that one little thing, and flipping the board to the, like, honestly, I can play this at 2, 3, or 4 and get the exact same experience or very, very similar experience in terms of like tension. What am I going for? What's available? It feels the same. Obviously it plays a little bit differently, but the feeling is I want to say the exact same across all player counts. So they did an incredible job at doing that because it is not easy. And there's so many games where you play 3 players and it's great, and you play 4 players, it's like, oh, that's way too long, and or that's not good anymore. Or play 2 players and you just don't get the same feeling because it's just a free for all.
It's open. You can do whatever you want all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. To create that tenseness and that tightness at all player counts is tough. I'm sure you know with you designing actual games. As I play games, I think that.
Yeah, for sure. I've only designed the one game that is strictly a 2-player game, so I have not ventured into I know. But I have thought about it, and we have brainstormed around like how could we make Kyperium a solo game or a multiplayer game, and thinking about it and doing some brainstorming and throwing ideas around it already feels like a really daunting task. That we're not even sure if we're going to go down that route for expansions. So we'll see. But so I guess in terms of underwater cities, like, is there anything specific that's your favorite thing that maybe is unique that we don't see in other games? I guess the color matching is the one main thing, right?
Yeah, that's my favorite thing about it is just the thought that I have to go through of, here are the 4 actions that are red. And I want to play this card, and that decision of I want to play this card or I want to take this action, and somehow finding the best route to do that is just is my favorite type of thought in that game. And it's just great.
Yeah. So just to lay it out a little bit, maybe better for you guys, the board split into 3 sections. There's the orange section with like 6 actions, 6 worker placement locations or so. Then there's the red section, which has, again, 4 to 6 worker placement sections, and then the green section. And then the green actions are weaker the red actions are mediocre and the orange actions are really strong. And then the cards have the same ratio,
Or like
but
the
it's flipped.
reverse. Yeah.
Your green cards are really strong, your red cards are mediocre, and your orange cards are weak. So, and at the beginning of your turn, no matter how many cards you have to discard down to 3 cards before you take your turn.
Right.
So it's very limiting in that way too. You're very much trying to make lemonade here, I find, in this game all the time. You're like, oh man, my options are limited here. What do I do? And you're trying to work towards a specific goal. So sometimes you're looking at a specific spot that you want on the board, but then you look at your hand and you don't have a card that synergizes well with that. So then you're like, am I going to take a slightly weaker action so that I could play this a card with it, or is there a card that I really want to play, but then there's no spots of that color that are available that really make sense for you? So you really have to try to make these tough decisions at all times, and that tension is always there. And I think that's one of the most important things in a Euro game of this type. For me, it's probably the card play too. And I think that Federation track is really underrated, because going first in this game, or going early if you're playing 3 or 4, is important in a lot of cases. Not every case, but often. And that I find that Federation track is something that a lot of newer players will ignore fully. And then they get halfway through the game and they're like, okay, now I see what's going on here.
Yeah, I need to be going first. Yeah. I don't need 3 actions gone before my turn, which are the ones you, especially early, even early, like you want, okay, I need to be able to build. And those might be gone before you even take your turn, you know? It's hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to especially be careful of that in Era 3, when you have 9 actions left at the beginning of Era 3, and you're like, okay, there's very specific things I need to accomplish here.
Yeah.
What's the priority? And am I going to be able to do it at all if I don't, move up on that Federation track? I usually try to be, the first player in that very last round if I can. I think that's really, really important.
It's important
in a lot of cases. Is there anything in Underwater Cities that you think could be improved upon, or that you don't love specifically?
Yeah, I guess what I like about games, maybe like a game like Castles of Burgundy, is the flow. And for how great this game flows from round to round, the production is really fun, but it can slog the game down. Like
it definitely grinds the game to a halt for a few minutes, for sure.
And then with new players, I end up counting everybody's stuff to me. It's like, they're like, I don't know what I've made. And I, double check it or whatever. When you play with people who are experienced, that can be like a minor speed bump. But in the first couple plays, and if you're playing with new people, that speed bump's a lot bigger. And it just kind of like freezes the game for a minute, and everyone goes, all right, let's take a 5-minute break and count your stuff.
And you get a ton of stuff.
Yeah, you get a ton of stuff. And so you're almost like making exchanges too with things. And then when you have powers and you're like, oh, instead of my green building producing this, it can produce this and this with this card. So now you're kind of making those exchanges. For how much I kind of like doing that, that would be something where I would be like, that's where the game, I think, slips slightly. How it could be smoother, I don't know, because it'd probably pull away from something else that I love. It's just part of the game,
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if, like, instead of collecting actual, like, little cardboard chits for resources, if there was some sort of track that you just like move up and down in the way that, like, White Castle does it, for example.
Okay. I haven't played White Castle yet.
So it's basically on your player board, you have a little track for how much of X you have, how much of Y you have, how much of Z you have, and you just move that up and down. So I wonder if that could speed things up, or at least clean things up. The game is a little bit finicky in that area, in the production area, especially for new players. So I 100% agree there. I think the workers that we have are these just like rectangular cardboard chits, I guess.
Yeah, they're nothing.
That are a door, I guess, to get into the.
Is that what they are?
It's a door. It's like a Star Trek-y door.
Okay.
That you, I guess, use to go into that underwater building to do the action, I guess, is the theming of it.
Yeah.
It needs to be cool little submarines or something.
So unlike the movie we're going to talk about, I think this game outshines its production, right? It was
100%.
There was not there was not a lot of thought in a lot of the beginning stuff. Or, Rio Grande for me has not made a quality game in a long time, but the game itself is really good. The production is weak in almost everything that they do.
Right. And I'd much rather it be that.
I agree.
In board gaming.
I mentioned Castles of Burgundy. I played the trash version of Castles of Burgundy forever, and the game was ugly as sin. The boards were flimsy, just like Underwater Cities, but the game just outshined all of that stuff. I have actually gone and basically, I have pimped out this game because it's my favorite game. Like, I'm buying everything for it. I have like a wooden insert that goes in it. I have 3D printed little submarines, like you said, for the player pieces.
I gotta get that.
I have like metal coins. I have the Geek Up bits that are like the Bakelite ones for all the resources. So I'm like, this is my favorite game of all time. I'm just going to do everything I want to it.
Fair. Yeah, totally.
So yeah, that's been definitely with it. But you're absolutely right. It's just like, okay, this is my worker. It's a flat piece of cardboard. Here you go. It's not even a like, person. It's not even a meeple. It's like,
yeah, like a standee, like anything, anything really. It's better than
you're
this.
right. So production is weak.
Yeah, but honestly, as you said, the game totally outshines it, and I'd much rather have a game underproduced and be an excellent game than what we get way more often these days, which is overproduced games that are sort of lackluster and fall flat.
Yep, that's the world we're in now. That's the time.
Yeah. Yeah, so you really have to do your research, I find, these days on the gameplay side, because so many games look incredible and then don't quite stand up to what they look like. But that's what sells games on Kickstarter.
It does.
Unfortunately.
Even in person. Even at game stores, art,
Yeah. Primarily art and production is like your A1 on Kickstarter to get games made. So that's Underwater Cities. Again, probably my second or third favorite game of all time, depending on what day you ask me. So who is this for? And maybe we start for who this is not for. I think the game is fairly long. On the box, it says 40 minutes per player. That's 40 minutes per experienced player. So if you and I played, it would probably take us 80 minutes to play.
Right. I think we'd be done in an hour and a half for sure. Yep. 80, 90 minutes.
Exactly. That's at 2 players, right? But this is not a game where there's like in a lot of these types of games, there's like a group goal or a group thing that when we hit it, that triggers the end game. So the player count doesn't matter as much, because whether you're 2 players contributing to that or 4 players contributing to that thing will still happen in X amount of turns.
Yeah.
In this game, it's like 30 actions. I think it's 30 actions per player. So essentially you're just, taking those 30 actions. So whether you're 2 players or 4 players is going to double the amount of time you're playing. I think the sweet spot for this game is probably 3. But as I said, if you're okay with the length of the game, 4 is still great. If you have the time to play. Yeah. And it's going to be, even longer for new players. There's quite a bit of things to wrap your head around in the first play. I think for a heavy game, it's fairly intuitive. In my opinion, a lot of times the theme kind of like helps you learn the rules because it kind of makes sense.
Does. Yeah, you can explain that board really easily.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of that in this game where it's like, okay, the green farms produce the green resources.
Shocking.
So those kinds of things that just make it fairly intuitive to just kind of, the thing you think it does. Yeah. That's kind of how I explain Apple and Macs to people. It's very intuitive.
Right.
If you think the thing does that, it actually does do that.
It probably does. Yeah.
Yeah. So is there anybody you think this game is maybe not for? Obviously it's fairly heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy. Like if your non-gamer friends are coming over, this isn't the game to play.
No.
People who are playing, the step from Catan and Ticket to Ride is not Catan, Ticket to Ride, Underwater Cities.
There's probably one more layer in there.
Yeah, there's one.
Like if they're playing Everdell, playing Everdell and they're playing, Raiders of the North Sea or of the West Kingdom games, then you could take them to probably this next step.
Then jump them up. Yeah, it's not a grandma game, but I do think if you got a kid that's 10, 11 and has played games before, I think they could sit down and play this. you might destroy them because, that's what you do. But like, again, like you said, the actions are intuitive. Put a worker down and try to play a card that's of the same color, and let's just see how the game goes. Where the game gets its depth is maximizing all of that stuff, right? And the timing and getting the action first and taking the special cards before anybody else does and getting those objectives before other people do. But the game itself can be played fairly simply. And that's what I think I really like about games with this depth is that comes from like me mastering the game or trying to master the game versus the complexity or fiddliness of rules that ups the complexity. Yeah. So if you've played some games before, I'd play this.
100%. Yeah. So game length and game depth is probably two things that might take some casual players out of the equation. But otherwise, if you're a gamer, this is a game you should definitely check out. For me, there's tons of for €1. There's lots of interactivity. There's no take that. You're not taking out other people's stuff or fighting or anything like that. But what other people are doing and how well they're doing it and where they might go on their next spaces, how many resources they have, keeping an eye on all that stuff will make you a better player at this game. And that's one of the things that I look for in a Euro game is that higher level of player interaction.
Yeah.
And then who is this for? I mean, if you like Euro gaming, if you like having something that you can look at the end and said, I built this, I did this. This is very satisfying in that way.
It looks great.
Satisfying is probably a word that I use a lot in this game because you're build, and then there's a production phase where you just get a ton of stuff based on how well you built. And that happens 3 times over the course of the game. And then it happens at the end of the game where you get all those resources and then turn those resources into points in a lot of cases with end game cards. Basically, long-term planning, medium to long-term planning is really important in this game. So if you like that stuff, if you like building and if you like the satisfaction of reaping what you sow, feels really great in this game. Other than that, I think there's a little bit of engine building. It's not an engine builder in the way that Terraforming Mars maybe is.
Right.
There's more of the engine building in that. What you lose there, you gain in the tactical decisions of the colors of the cards and trying to min-max in that way.
Yeah, which to me is a more enjoyable experience.
Yeah, agree. Good to move on to ratings here, Jeff.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so I have it as a 9.5. It's like almost a perfect game. The few minor quibbles that I had with it is probably just what takes it down to a 9.5. Jason did play this one time with me a couple of weeks ago. I wanted to introduce it to him for the podcast, and then alas, he didn't end up being here, which is fine. But after just one play, shout out to Jason. He did beat us, so I'm gonna call that beginner's luck.
It was beginner's luck.
But no,
you were teaching the game. You had to pay attention to all his stuff. Yeah.
I basically played for himself. I basically played for him.
He's not here to defend himself. He can say whatever we want.
That's right. So he ranked this at an 8.5, but obviously probably needs some more plays to kind of come up with a final number. What about you, Jeff? Do you do the rating thing on BGG?
I don't click on it on BGG.
Okay.
Usually it's just kind of in my brain.
Gotcha.
I think I'm living in your world. I'll just go at 9.6. How about that? Because, I'll just say like it's like 1.1 better than you.
0.1 better than me.
Yeah,
Fine.
because
it's
again,
not
I don't
competition, Jeff.
Yeah, I know, right? Okay, then 9.5. We'll tie. I think it's right in that world of, I have a few games up there that I think are, close to flawless. In my opinion. Again, people play the game and they're like, it's good, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, it just hits everything that I enjoy in games. And again, maybe the half a rating comes down, I think, from just the screeching halt of a production era. And having to sort of do that and manage that with new players and with everybody, maybe just lets it slip from that perfect score rating. And again, it's like when I rank games, and you might do the same thing, I sort of rank it up against games in a similar weight or category.
Fair, yeah.
I'm not going to rate for how much I love Strike in the party game, goofy, silly, just silliness category. That game's like a 9.
Right.
Do I think it's even in the category of underwater cities? Of course not, right? So I kind of separate them, sort of like people
Apples
do in
and
movies.
oranges.
Yeah, what's your favorite comedy movie versus action? So this
That's
being my top worker placement card hand management type of game, it's got to be close to a 10. So
yeah,
that's what I got.
right on. I'm right there with you. Let's take a quick second to talk about Vladimir. I think it's Suhi. I
Is
think
it? I just keep calling him Vladimir Suchi.
I'm sure either is fine, but
well, when he listens to the show, he can reach out to us and let us know.
That's right. Yeah, Vladdy, definitely reach out. Let us know.
Yeah, let us know.
Let us know how to say Suhi. I feel like I'm being pretentious by saying it that way, but
yeah, like I know.
Maybe yeah. Anyways, so Vladimir Suhi, what have you played a bunch of his other games? He is one of my favorite designers, although I haven't played all his games.
Yeah, so he started out, there was 2 games like really early that are Last Will and The Prodigal's Club were like 2 kind of early on games that he designed. And then he sort of like broke out, right? In my opinion, into doing Underwater Cities and Pulsar 2849. Those 2 games I think blew up, especially Pulsar. I think Pulsar blew up more because it was a CGE game, and CGE kind of knows how to push their games a little more than Delicious and Rio Grande. I feel like since that time, 2018, every year he's come out with like just one really better than good Euro game.
Right.
I've played like Woodcraft, Evacuation, Messina, and some numbers, Messina 1347. Yeah. All of those games I play and I'm like, damn, these are just good games. And what he does in all of these games that I love so much is something is different about the action selection. In Pulsar, he uses these dice and the pips. In Woodcraft,
the dice drafting mechanism in Pulsar is genius.
It is. And I'm like, dude, how does this guy do this? And then he's got this big wheel in it's a saw blade in Woodcraft where you can pick in certain areas and you get bonuses depending on how far you go and how far you don't. You can't advance the game too far. Messina's got these like sort of like people tracks. We just played Evacuation, and Evacuation has a similar card play where you're placing cards next to the action you want to do, and the card also has an action. The actions have points, which allow you to do something. Everything he's doing is something creative with action selection, and I love that. Instead of just, this is what I'm doing, right? There's always some cool caveat to it, and I just enjoy a twist,
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that a lot. I mean, there's only so many game mechanisms. So if you can find a way to really iterate and do something unique, I think that's important. That's what we tried to do with Kyperium, right? Like having to place your workers on your opponent's cards.
Yeah,
I felt like that was unique and interesting. And so we built the whole game around that.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's the main thing. You know, that's the elevator pitch. That's what you're going to hear.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. Like if you tried to give an elevator pitch for a lot of other games, it just sounds like every other game.
Yeah. You put a worker on this spot. Done. Like, I don't want to hear it anymore.
And then you get a thing. You get the thing from that spot.
Yeah, you get a thing. Okay. Right. You need, and we talk about this on the Gamecaster show all the time. These games, especially because we're in an era of everything's repeating. All right. Oh, cool. A rolling right. Great. What's your thing? What's the thing that's going to make this game
what differentiates
or
it?
Cool. And
it seems that Suhi does that quite a bit, which is
gets it.
What put me in you know, in his camp. I'm a huge Suhi fan. Pulsar, I'm a big fan of. Evacuation, I've played twice now, and it's maybe one of the hardest games I've ever played. I enjoy it, but man, is it tough.
Again, can be played casually, but it's a hard game.
Yeah, like the rules aren't necessarily that difficult, but man, is it tough to do something well.
Right.
It's tough to do that game well.
Yeah, and to be good.
But the resources on the different, like in the old world versus the new world, that's the thing for this game, right?
Yeah.
For Evacuation.
Why is it so hard?
And then like Last Will is super fun too. That's a game where you start rich and your goal is to just get rid of all of your resources.
Maybe that'll be our next episode. If we continue to do this in the future, maybe a year from now we'll do Last Will and Brewster's Millions.
Sounds good.
That's great.
Yeah. So, and then Woodcraft is one that's been on my radar that I almost purchased with my birthday excursion, but I ended up picking something else up instead. But I definitely need to check that one out. I hear great things.